The bell rang before the Duke touched the cord. Phoebe Larkin saw his hand stop less than an inch from the braided pull, saw the faint tightening in his jaw, and understood at once that the sound frightened him more than he would ever allow the household to know. It was November of 1851, and the great dining room at Norcombe Hall seemed built to preserve silence. 30 candles burned along a table set for one man. Rain pressed softly against the tall windows. Silver covers reflected the light with such cold perfection that the simple bowl of barley broth Phoebe had placed before him looked almost improper. Cedric Tresham, Duke of Norchester, did not look toward the door when the bell sounded. He looked at Phoebe. "Did I pull it?" he asked. His voice was low and controlled. Phoebe stood beside the sideboard in her plain grey dress, hands folded before her. She had been at Norcombe Hall for less than one day. She already knew the wrong answer would be safer. "No, Your Grace." The bell rang again. This time the sound came from beyond the wall, sharper than before. Cedric lowered his hand. "You are certain?" "Yes." Footsteps hurried along the service passage. A young footman entered, carrying a decanter of claret. "Your Grace, you rang twice." Cedric's gaze remained fixed on Phoebe. "Did I?" The footman faltered. "The dining room marker fell twice, Your Grace." "I did not ask what the marker did." Cedric turned at last. "I asked whether I rang." The footman looked toward the visible cord beside the Duke's chair, then toward Phoebe, as though she had somehow made the question dangerous. "I didn't see you, Your Grace." "Then take the claret away." "Yes, Your Grace." The footman withdrew. The door closed. For several seconds the only sound was the rain. Cedric looked at the bowl before him. Half the broth was gone. Phoebe had not expected him to eat more than one spoonful. She had not expected to stand in a ducal dining room at all. That morning, she had arrived at the servants' entrance with one small trunk and a reference that said less about her than its omissions. Mrs. Weatherby, the housekeeper, had read it twice. "You left Ashby House after 6 months." "Yes, ma'am." "Without another position arranged." Yes, Mrs. Weatherby had waited for an explanation. Phoebe had offered only the truth. "I would not accept blame for an order I did not give." The housekeeper had looked at her as though truth, badly timed, were another form of insolence. At Norcombe Hall, a between maid does not interpret orders. She obeys them. Phoebe had curtsied. "Then I hope the orders are clear." Mrs. Weatherby had assigned her to the lower passage and sent her to the kitchen. There, Phoebe found a girl of perhaps 15 standing over a wash basin, biting her lip while one hand reddened beneath the tap. A broken crock lay on the floor. "What happened?" Phoebe asked. "Nothing." The girl pulled her hand back. "Cook said I was to finish the onions. Your hand says otherwise." "I dropped the dish. That is not the same as burning yourself on purpose." Phoebe folded a clean cloth, soaked it in cool water, and wrapped the girl's fingers. "Keep this on for 10 minutes. What is your name?" "Nell." "I am Phoebe." Nell glanced toward the kitchen door. "Mrs. Pike will be angry." "She may be angry after your hand has stopped burning." Mrs. Pike did arrive angry, though not for the reason Nell feared. One of the undercooks had gone home ill. A delivery of game had not arrived. The Duke's supper tray was due in less than an hour. "Broth," Phoebe said after looking over the provisions. Mrs. Pike stared at her. "You have been here 20 minutes. There is barley, onion, sage, and yesterday's chicken stock. His Grace does not eat barley broth." "Does he eat what you usually send, Mrs.?" Pike's mouth tightened. "He dines alone." "That was not my question." The cook should have dismissed her. Instead, exhaustion won. Phoebe was allowed to finish the broth under supervision. She skimmed the stock, softened the onion, added barley, sage, and a little cream. Nothing elaborate. Nothing that asked a grieving man to admire it. When the tray was ready, Mrs. Weatherby appeared and frowned at the silver service. "That plate is wrong." Phoebe looked down at the cracked pewter plate beneath the bread. A crescent-shaped fracture ran near one edge, clean but old. It was in the warming cupboard. Because it is not used, then why is it kept polished? Mrs. Weatherby's eyes chilled. "Replace it." Phoebe looked toward the long silver place setting beyond the open dining room doors. One chair, one napkin, one glittering arrangement that seemed less like supper than a monument to absence. "The silver makes solitude look like ceremony," she said. "The pewter makes it look temporary." Mrs. Weatherby drew breath. "You will do as you are told." Before Phoebe could move, the Duke entered. He was taller than she had expected, broad-shouldered, dark-haired, and severe without appearing vain. His face held the stillness of a man long observed for signs of weakness. "What is temporary?" he asked. No one answered quickly enough. His gaze moved to the tray. "Who prepared that, Mrs.?" Pike stepped forward. "The new maid assisted, Your Grace." Assisted. Phoebe heard the warning in the cook's tone and ignored it. "I prepared the broth, Your Grace." Cedric looked at her. "Why?" "Because you required supper. I require what is ordered. Then it should be possible to tell whether what is ordered is eaten." The silence became dangerous. Mrs. Weatherby said, "Your Grace." "The girl has not yet learned her place." Cedric's eyes remained on Phoebe. "And what place do you imagine she has learned?" Phoebe answered carefully. "The place beside the tray, Your Grace." Something shifted in his expression. Not amusement. Recognition, perhaps, though she could not know of what. He sat. "Leave it." Mrs. Weatherby hesitated. "The plate is unsuitable." Cedric looked down at the crescent crack. His face changed so completely that Phoebe wished she had obeyed. "Where did you find this?" "In the warming cupboard." "Who gave you permission to use it?" "No one." Mrs. Weatherby stepped forward. "I will remove it." Cedric placed one hand over the edge of the plate. "No." The words stopped everyone. He touched the crack with his thumb. "It belonged to my brother." No one had told Phoebe about a brother. "I am sorry, Your Grace." Julian said, "Pewter made food taste honest." His voice had gone distant. He carved crescents into everything he wished to claim. Phoebe saw a shallow crescent near the plate's underside, almost hidden by age. Cedric saw her notice. "You chose it without knowing." "Yes." "Why?" "Because silver did not suit the supper." Mrs. Weatherby made a quiet sound of disapproval. Cedric ignored her. "And the supper was meant to be eaten." He looked at the bowl, then at Phoebe. "You presume much for a woman newly arrived. Only that hunger is not improved by rank." Mrs. Pike closed her eyes. Cedric lifted the spoon. He tasted the broth once. Then again. No one in the room moved. After several mouthfuls, he said, "Leave us." Mrs. Weatherby looked startled. "Your Grace." "All of you except the maid." They withdrew with varying degrees of alarm. Phoebe remained beside the sideboard. Cedric ate half the bowl before speaking again. "My household believes I prefer elaborate meals." "Do you?" "No." "Then someone has confused habit with preference." His spoon paused. "You make that sound common." "It is. And dangerous." "Sometimes." He looked toward the empty chair opposite him. "You speak as if you have observed this house for years." "I have observed people for years." "That is not the same thing." "No, houses usually hide less." His gaze returned to her. The candles made his eyes appear darker than they were. "Why did you leave your last position?" Phoebe chose each word. "A lady's companion instructed a maid to send a letter." The letter caused embarrassment. The companion denied giving the order. And you defended the maid. I refuse to support the lie. You lost your position for that? I lost it because the truth was less useful than obedience. Cedric set down the spoon. At Norcombe Hall, usefulness is highly valued. I had noticed. That was when he reached toward the bell cord, perhaps to summon the next course or dismiss her. The bell rang first. Now, after the footman had gone and the sound had faded, Cedric looked toward the wall as though it contained a memory no one else could hear. "This has happened before," Phoebe said. His attention snapped back to her. "You were not asked to interpret. No, then do not." "Very well." She waited. He looked again at the untouched cord. "But you believe it has happened before?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because the footman did not seem surprised that the marker fell. He seemed surprised that you questioned it." Cedric leaned back slowly. "You notice too much." "That has also been said before." He looked at the cracked plate, then at the half-empty bowl. "Tomorrow, you will bring supper again." Phoebe inclined her head. "Yes, Your Grace, and if the bell rings before I touch it, I will tell you what I see." Cedric held her gaze. "Even if the household says otherwise?" Phoebe thought of Ashby House, of the reference that omitted the truth, of Nell hiding a burned hand because punishment seemed more certain than care. "Especially then," she said. At breakfast the next morning, Mr. Pritchard confirmed that the dining room marker had fallen twice. He did so in the small service office, with the call board mounted behind him and the previous night's ledger open beneath his hand. Phoebe stood near the door because Mrs. Weatherby had told her to remain only long enough to answer questions. Cedric stood beside the desk. He had not summoned a chair. "You saw the marker fall?" he asked. "I saw it hanging after the second signal, Your Grace," Pritchard replied. "And the first?" Mills was nearest the board. Mills shifted his weight. "It fell both times, Your Grace." Cedric looked at the row of ivory markers. Each was labelled in black script: morning room, west library, blue bedchamber, dining room. The dining room marker now rested in place, innocent and unmoving. "Could another room have pulled it?" Cedric asked. Pritchard's hesitation lasted less than a second. Phoebe still saw it. Old houses sometimes carry movement through adjoining lines. "Does Norcombe Hall?" "Occasionally." "How occasionally?" The butler looked toward Mrs. Weatherby. She answered for him. "The system is more than 60 years old, Your Grace. No mechanism of that age is exact." Cedric's gaze settled on her, yet the servants obey it, as though it were. Mrs. Weatherby folded her hands. "They obey the call board because that is the established order of the house. Even when I have not called. The servants cannot always know what Your Grace remembers doing." The words were mild. Their effect was not. Cedric became very still. Phoebe saw the moment the question moved from the mechanism to himself. Mrs. Weatherby saw it too, and continued more gently. "No disrespect is intended. Grief and fatigue affect every man differently." Cedric looked toward Phoebe. "You may go." The dismissal should have ended her involvement. Instead, he added, "Return at 7 with supper." Phoebe curtsied and turned toward the passage. As she passed the call board, something dark caught beneath the dining room fitting. She stopped. A single strand, no longer than half an inch, had lodged where the brass guide met the wood. It was black and stiff. Phoebe bent closer. "What are you doing?" Mrs. Weatherby asked, looking. "At what?" Phoebe did not touch the strand with her fingers. She drew a pin from the cuff of her sleeve and lifted it free. "This." Pritchard leaned forward. Cedric crossed the room. The strand lay against the silver pin, dark as ink. "Horsehair," Phoebe said. Mrs. Weatherby's mouth tightened. Or brush fibre. A brush fibre would be softer. Pritchard examined it. The official cords are red worsted. Yes, Phoebe said. This came from somewhere else. Cedric looked at the brass guide. A shallow line marked its lower edge, too sharp to be ordinary wear. Phoebe pointed with the pin. That cut is fresh. How can you tell? He asked. The exposed brass is brighter than the surface around it. Mrs. Weatherby gave an impatient breath. A maid's guess should not become an inquiry. Cedric did not look at her. Has this fitting been repaired recently? Pritchard shook his head. Not to my knowledge. Who oversees such work? Mr. Brierly. Cedric's expression changed only slightly. Send for him. Mrs. Weatherby stepped nearer. Your Grace, Lady Maud is expected this afternoon. There are arrangements to be made. Lady Maud wrote that she would arrive tomorrow. Her plans changed. When? A letter came yesterday. Cedric's eyes sharpened. I received no letter. Mrs. Weatherby lowered her gaze. It may have gone to the estate office. Then Mr. Brierly may explain that as well. Phoebe expected to be dismissed again. Instead, Cedric held out his hand. She placed the pin across his palm without touching him. He examined the horsehair, then wrapped it in a scrap of ledger paper. Keep the board as it is, he told Pritchard. No cleaning, no repair. Yes, Your Grace. Phoebe left before Mrs. Weatherby could find another reason to send her elsewhere. The rest of the day passed beneath the pressure of Lady Maud's approaching carriage. Fires were lit in rooms that had been closed. Sheets were changed in the blue bedchamber. Silver was polished twice. Felicity Vane's name travelled through the servants' hall before the lady herself appeared, attached to trunks, hat boxes, a maid, and several whispered expectations. Phoebe heard that Felicity was beautiful, well-connected, and often invited wherever Lady Maud went. She also heard that Cedric's aunt had hoped for years to see Felicity settled at Norcombe. At 7, Phoebe carried supper into the dining room. Mrs. Pike had prepared roast chicken, carrots, and a small dish of buttered turnips. Phoebe added fresh bread and placed the cracked pewter plate beside it. Cedric entered while she adjusted the candle nearest his chair. You brought it again, he said. You asked for supper. The plate. You did not forbid it. Most servants wait to be told what is permitted. Most rules become clear after the first punishment. His gaze rested on her. Were you punished often? Not often enough to become agreeable. A faint movement touched his mouth, gone before it became a smile. He sat and uncovered the chicken. Phoebe remained near the sideboard. On the opposite side of the table, she had placed a second bread plate. Nothing more. No knife. No glass. No formal setting that could be mistaken for presumption. Cedric noticed it before he lifted his fork. Why is that there? For choice. Whose? Yours. He looked at the empty chair. You have set no place, only room. Explain the distinction. Phoebe folded her hands. A table arranged for one man makes solitude look like a commandment. A second bread plate makes it look temporary. You said something similar yesterday. It remains true. He looked at the plate for a long moment. Sit. Phoebe did not move. Your Grace, you placed the plate. Use it. Mrs. Weatherby would object. Miss Weatherby is not dining. That may not prevent her. Cedric broke the loaf in half and set one portion on the second plate. Sit, Miss Larkin. It was the first time he had used her name. She took the chair opposite him, keeping her back straight and her hands in her lap. You may eat the bread, he said. Thank you. The room felt different with another person seated in it. Not warm, exactly. Less absolute. Cedric ate several bites of chicken before glancing at Julian's plate. He hated silver. Your brother? He said it made every meal taste of obligation. Cedric turned the cracked pewter slightly. He scratched crescents into his walking stick, his pistol case, even the bottom of a boot he particularly liked. Why crescents? He thought full moons looked too pleased with themselves. Phoebe smiled before she could prevent it. Cedric saw. You would have liked him. You speak as though liking him was unavoidable. Nearly. His gaze lowered to the crack. The night he left, we argued. Phoebe waited. He said nothing more. She did not ask. After a moment, he looked at her bread. You have not eaten. Phoebe broke off a piece. I was listening. That is not generally considered a substitute for food. Neither is rank. This time the small change in his face lasted longer. He ate in silence, and Phoebe did the same. The restraint between them was not comfort yet, but it was no longer hostility. Near the end of the meal, footsteps sounded in the outer corridor. The dining room door opened without announcement. Lady Maid entered in plum-colored silk, her traveling gloves still buttoned. Felicity Vane stood just behind her in pale grey, younger than Phoebe had expected and far more watchful. Lady Maud's gaze moved from Cedric to Phoebe, then to the two bread plates. Her expression did not sharpen. That would have been easier. Instead, concern softened every feature. Cedric, she said, did you imagine company again? Phoebe felt Cedric's hand close around the bread knife. He did not look at his aunt. He looked across the table at Phoebe, as though the answer now belonged not to memory, but to witness. Cedric did not release the bread knife. He laid it beside his plate with deliberate care and looked at Lady Maud across the long table. No, he said. I invited Miss Larkin to sit. The answer changed the room more completely than anger would have done. Lady Maud's concern did not vanish. It refined itself. Then I am relieved. She removed one glove finger by finger. For a moment, I feared the strain of recent days had returned. Felicity Vane stepped into the candlelight. She was indeed beautiful, but not delicately so. Her face had the polished confidence of a woman accustomed to entering rooms' ends, already certain they would approve of her. She glanced at Phoebe's plain grey dress, then at the bread on the second plate. How thoughtful of Miss Larkin to keep you company. Cedric's gaze cooled. It was my invitation. Of course, Felicity smiled. I only meant that servants usually wait until they are asked. Phoebe met her eyes. I did wait. A brief stillness followed. Lady Maud looked at Cedric rather than Phoebe. Your new maid is very exact. Accuracy has become useful in this house. You speak as though we have suffered from its absence. A bell rang twice before I touched the cord. Lady Maud's hand paused at the second glove. Old mechanisms are unreliable. So I have been told. And yet you have allowed a girl here less than 2 days to turn an ordinary fault into suspicion. Cedric's expression remained controlled. She turned nothing into anything. She answered what she saw. Lady Maud looked at Phoebe then, and the softness in her face became more dangerous because it remained flawless. Miss Larkin, His Grace has endured a long period of grief. Those who serve him best understand that certainty is not always kindness. Phoebe felt the warning beneath the words. I would not call uncertainty kind either, my lady. Felicity's brows rose slightly. Cedric did not rebuke her. Lady Maud drew out the chair at his right and sat without invitation. You see, Cedric, she speaks as though she already knows what care requires. Perhaps because care should not require a lie. His aunt's eyes sharpened for the first time. No one has spoken of lies. You implied I imagined company. I asked because I was concerned. You asked before greeting me. Felicity intervened with practiced lightness. Travel makes everyone clumsy. Lady Maud has spoken of nothing but your well-being since we left London. Then she may begin by explaining why her arrival letter never reached me. Lady Maud looked faintly surprised. I sent it yesterday morning. To whom? To the estate office, as always. Not to me. Mr. Brierly handles practical matters. My aunt's arrival is not an estate matter. No, it is a family matter, which is why I spared you the inconvenience. Cedric leaned back. You did not spare me. You decided for me. The words settled heavily. Phoebe saw Lady Maud measure the distance between disagreement and public challenge. At last, she smiled. We will discuss it when you are rested. I am not tired. Then, when we are alone. Her glance moved toward Phoebe. Cedric understood. Miss Larkin will finish her supper. Felicity looked at Phoebe with a new attention, less amused than before. Does she often dine here? She has done so once, and already the room appears transformed. It is a room, Cedric said, not a battlefield. No, Felicity replied softly, but rooms reveal who has been invited into them. Lady Maud rose before the exchange could sharpen further. Come, Felicity, we have been travelling for hours. At the door, Felicity paused beside the footman, waiting in the passage. Her voice was low, but Phoebe heard it. Does Miss Larkin now interpret His Grace's wishes for the servants? The footman flushed. I wouldn't know, miss. Then perhaps you should. She followed Lady Maud into the corridor. Cedric waited until their footsteps faded. You should not have answered my aunt. Phoebe looked at him. You answered her first. I possess the rank to survive it. Then I am fortunate you used it. Something in his face shifted, not quite approval. You are not frightened enough. I am frightened precisely enough. That is not possible. It is preferable to being frightened in advance. He looked toward the door through which Felicity had gone. She will repeat that question. Yes, and the servants will begin answering it for themselves. Phoebe stood. Then, I should return to the kitchen before they decide. I have taken the blue bedchamber. Cedric almost smiled, but the expression vanished when she lifted the second bread plate. Leave it, he said. Phoebe set it down again. Why? Because I asked you to sit. The meal is finished. The fact is not. He looked at the two plates. Let it remain. Phoebe curtsied and left him with the table no longer arranged for one. By 9 the next morning, Felicity's question had already travelled below stairs. Phoebe heard it first from Nell, who whispered while folding napkins in the lower passage. Mills says you tell His Grace what he meant to order. Mills says many things when another person has begun them. Nell looked worried. Mrs. Weatherby asked whether you sat at the table. I did. Will she send you away? She may try. The attempt came before noon. Mrs. Weatherby summoned Phoebe to the linen room, where a folded sheet of paper lay on the table beside a ring of keys. You are to report to the laundry cottage after luncheon, she said. The second laundry maid has taken ill. Phoebe looked at the paper. Who issued the order? His Grace. It is unsigned. Household instructions are not contracts. No, but they should still belong to the person whose name is used. Mrs. Weatherby's eyes hardened. You will not question every direction given to you. Only those said to come from a man who did not give the last one. You presume too much because His Grace tolerated you at supper. Phoebe kept her hands still. I will go if he confirms it. You will go because I told you. Then say it is your order. Mrs. Weatherby stepped closer. Do not test me. I am not. I am asking for accuracy. The door opened before the housekeeper could answer. Cedric stood on the threshold with Pritchard behind him. He looked from Phoebe to the paper. What is this? Mrs. Weatherby recovered at once. A temporary transfer, Your Grace. The laundry requires help. Why does it bear my name, Mr. Brierly said the arrangement reflected your preference. Cedric held out his hand. Phoebe passed him the paper. He read it once. I gave no such instruction. Mrs. Weatherby's composure faltered. Then Mr. Brierly may have misunderstood. Again? Cedric looked at Phoebe. Did you refuse? I asked for confirmation. You have it. You remain where you were assigned, Mrs. Weatherby drew breath. Your Grace, discipline cannot be maintained if servants appeal every order to you. Discipline cannot be maintained by inventing mine. Footsteps sounded in the passage. Enoch Brierly entered carrying a ledger beneath one arm. He was a narrow man in his middle 40s, precisely dressed, with the dry self-possession of someone who had spent years making authority look administrative. Your Grace, I was told there was confusion. Cedric handed him the paper. Why is my name attached to an order I did not give? Brierly read it without surprise. The household understood that Miss Larkin's presence near the dining room had become disruptive. The household or you? I sought to prevent embarrassment. Whose? Brierly glanced at Phoebe. A new maid should not become the subject of speculation. Then stop feeding it. Cedric's voice remained quiet. She stays. Brierly inclined his head. As your Grace wishes. Phoebe saw dark residue near his thumbnail, almost the color of the black strand found beneath the callboard. Mr. Brierly, she said, why would horsehair be used when the official bell cords are red worsted? Mrs. Weatherby looked appalled. Brierly turned toward her slowly. Old houses contain many materials. That does not answer the question. It answers as much as your position requires. Cedric stepped between them by less than a foot. The movement was small, but it changed the balance of the room. Answer the question, not her rank. Brierly's jaw tightened. Horsehair is sometimes used for concealed lengths because it stretches less than wool. It may remain from an earlier system. Then where does it run? Phoebe asked. If I knew every abandoned line in Norcombe's walls, I would be a carpenter rather than a steward. He bowed to Cedric. I will inspect the board. You will do so with Pritchard present, Cedric said. No fitting is removed. Brierly gave another precise bow and left. That evening, Phoebe was carrying folded napkins past the servants' hall when the dining room ivory marker dropped. No bell sounded. No visible cord moved. Pritchard stood beside the board and saw it happen. At the far end of the passage, Brierly was already watching. The dining room marker dropped without a sound. Pritchard's hand stopped above the service ledger. Phoebe stood 3 feet from the callboard with a stack of folded napkins against her chest. At the far end of the passage, Brierly did not start or turn. He was already looking directly at the fallen ivory marker. You expected that, Phoebe said. Pritchard glanced toward her, but Brierly only adjusted the ledger beneath his arm. I expected nothing. Then you were remarkably prepared to see it. He came closer at an unhurried pace. A steward who knows his house watches the board. Before a signal, Phoebe asked, you are confusing attention with guilt. Pritchard lowered the marker into place without touching any other fitting. The bell did not sound. Brierly looked at him. Old mechanisms sometimes release without completing the pull. That explanation changes each time, Phoebe said. First, the walls carried movement, then abandoned horsehair remained from another system. Now the marker falls because the mechanism releases itself. Brierly's expression stayed controlled, but the skin beside his mouth tightened. You have been in this house 3 days. long enough to know that 3 different explanations are not one answer. Pritchard cleared his throat. Miss Larkin. It was a warning, though not an unkind one. Phoebe looked at the ledger beneath his hand. What time will you record? 8 minutes past 8. Write it now. Brierly's gaze moved to her. The butler does not require instruction from a between maid. No, the record requires the correct time. Pritchard dipped his pen and entered the marker drop at 8:08. Brierly watched the nib move. This is unnecessary. Then it will do no harm, Phoebe replied. Cedric arrived before the ink had dried. He had been crossing from the library when Pritchard sent Mills to find him. The Duke entered the service passage without ceremony, his dark coat still unbuttoned. What happened? Pritchard indicated the board. The dining room marker fell, Your Grace. No bell sounded. Who saw it? Miss Larkin and I, Cedric, looked toward Brierly. And you? I arrived as it fell. Phoebe did not correct him at once. She watched Cedric's face as the familiar uncertainty appeared. It was subtle, a slight narrowing of the eyes, a pause before the next question. Was the dining room occupied? No, Your Grace, Pritchard said. Was anyone near the visible cord? Not to my knowledge. Cedric turned to Phoebe. You disagree with something. Only with the timing. Brierly's eyes chilled. Miss Larkin cannot know when I arrived. I saw you watching before the marker moved. You saw me in the passage, facing the board. Because I was coming to inspect it, as ordered. Cedric looked between them. Then the inspection begins now. Brierly bowed. Of course, with Pritchard present, as Your Grace directed. Cedric's gaze shifted to the ledger. 8 minutes past 8. He read the fresh entry aloud. Keep that page open. Phoebe felt Brierly's attention sharpen. It was the first sign that the exact time mattered. The inspection found nothing Brierly was willing to name. He tested the brass guide, checked the visible red cords, and declared the mechanism old but serviceable. Pritchard watched every movement. Phoebe watched Brierly's hands. Dark residue remained near his thumbnail. When he touched the lower edge of the dining room fitting, he used his sleeve rather than his bare fingers. Why cover your hand? She asked, to avoid leaving oil on the brass. There is already oil on it, he turned. All mechanisms require lubrication. Then why was the residue black yesterday and clear on the official cords? Because different fittings age differently. Cedric's voice cut through the exchange. Enough. Nothing is to be removed. Brierly straightened. Then the fault may continue. Let it. Cedric looked at the fallen marker, now reset. A repeated fault is easier to understand than a repaired one no witness has examined. Phoebe saw Brierly understand that Cedric had begun learning how to wait. The steward bowed and left. At supper, the dining room felt more watchful than silent. Mrs. Pike sent roast partridge, boiled potatoes, and carrots glazed with a little butter. Phoebe placed the cracked pewter plate beside the bread, but no second plate. Cedric noticed immediately. You have removed the choice. Lady Maud has taught the household to interpret it. And that concerns you. It concerns the servants who may be questioned because of it. He sat. You are protecting them. I am avoiding unnecessary use of them. Cedric uncovered the partridge. That distinction appears important to you. It is. He ate several bites before asking, what did Brierly mean when he said he arrived as the marker fell? He meant to place him close enough to explain it without admitting he expected it. That is interpretation. Yes, you objected when my aunt interpreted for me. I objected when she presented interpretation as fact. Cedric leaned back. Then give me only the facts. Phoebe had prepared for the request. The marker fell at 8:08. Mr. Pritchard entered it while the ink was fresh. Mr. Brierly was already facing the board. No bell sounded. No one was in the dining room. Anything else? Yes. She crossed to the sideboard and lifted a small service book used for evening calls. This was on the pantry desk before supper. Cedric opened it. The entry for that evening read, "Dining room rang once at 8:02. Claret declined. It says I rang 6 minutes before the marker fell. And before you entered the dining room," Cedric touched the line with one finger. "Who wrote it? No initials. Is that unusual?" Mr. Pritchard initials his entries. Mills makes a hook beneath the last letter. This hand belongs to neither. Cedric examined the page. The ink is dry. It was dry when I found it, so the record was written before the event. Yes, the words settled between them. Cedric looked toward the visible bell pull. For years, there have been reports of orders I did not remember giving. Phoebe remained still. Claret sent when I had asked for none. Fires lit in rooms I had closed. Carriages prepared for calls I never intended to make. What did you do? At first I corrected them. He lowered his gaze to the false entry. Then Lady Maud said the household was frightened by my temper. She advised me not to examine every discrepancy. Why? She said grief had made me uncertain, and that questioning the servants would only deepen their fear. Did you believe her? Cedric did not answer immediately. Julian died after leaving this house in anger. I had reason to distrust my judgment. Phoebe heard what he did not say. Guilt had made every contradiction easier to accept. Your grief explains why doubt entered, she said. It does not explain who kept feeding it. His eyes lifted to hers. You believe someone did. I believe this page was written 6 minutes before the event it describes. You refuse to go beyond what you can prove. Not always, but I try to know when I have crossed the line. Cedric looked again at the record. Lady Maud said certainty was not always kindness. She may be right. Surprise touched his face. Phoebe continued. But uncertainty is not kindness when it is arranged for someone else's benefit. A faint scrape sounded behind the service wall. Cedric rose at once. Phoebe turned toward the narrow door leading to the pantry passage. The sound came again. Wood against wood, then silence. Cedric moved toward it. Stay here. No. He looked back. That was not a request. Then it is the wrong order. His jaw tightened. You are a servant in my house. And the only witness who has consistently seen what happens before the household explains it. He stared at her. The argument lasted only a breath. Then he opened the passage door and stepped aside enough for her to follow. The corridor beyond was empty. One lamp burned at the far end. Near the lower panel, a thin line of pale wood showed where the molding had recently shifted. Cedric reached for it. Phoebe caught his sleeve, then released it at once. Do not open it. His gaze dropped to the place where her hand had been. Because whoever moved it may be waiting to see whether we react. You expect me to leave a concealed panel untouched in my own house. For tonight, that is a great deal of trust to ask. No, it is a small amount of patience. He looked at the fresh line in the wood. Anger tightened his shoulders. For a moment, Phoebe thought he would tear the panel free simply because others expected him to. Then he stepped back. Tomorrow, he said, with Pritchard, and a mark beneath the moulding. Cedric glanced at her. To show whether it is opened again. Yes, he gave one short nod, then returned to the dining room. Supper had cooled, but Cedric sat again. He looked at the false entry, the untouched bell cord, and the cracked plate. I have not trusted my judgment in 10 years. Phoebe stood across from him, no longer merely beside the tray. Doubt is not the same as incapacity. His expression changed. The words had reached some place Lady Maud's concern could not. After she left, Phoebe passed through the lower corridor on her way to the kitchen. Brierly emerged from the shadow near the old pantry door. He carried no tool and offered no greeting. A smear of black oil marked the cuff of his coat. Behind him, the panel line was no longer pale. Someone had already wiped it clean. By dawn, the thin mark Phoebe had made beneath the moulding had shifted. She had pressed a grain of white chalk into the narrow seam before leaving the passage the night before. Now the chalk lay broken across the floorboards, and a dark smear glistened where the panel met the wall. Someone had opened it after midnight. "Mister," Pritchard stood beside her with a lamp raised near the wood. "You are certain this was undisturbed when you left?" "Yes, and no one else knew of the mark. His Grace knew we intended to make one. I did not tell him where." Pritchard looked toward the empty passage. That was prudent. It was distrustful. Sometimes they are neighbors. He set the lamp on a shelf and examined the moulding without touching it. "We should send for His Grace. After we know who is permitted to see what we find." Pritchard's mouth tightened. "You suspect, mister?" "Really. I saw black oil on his cuff after the mark had been wiped from the panel. That is not proof." "No. It is a reason not to invite him first." Footsteps approached from the lower corridor. Nell appeared, with folded cloths stacked to her chin. She stopped when she saw them beside the panel. "I didn't know anyone still used that passage." Phoebe turned. "Still used?" Nell's eyes moved quickly to Pritchard. "I only meant it's old." "How old?" Pritchard asked. The girl shifted the cloths against her chest. "Mrs. Pike says there used to be a warming recess there, before the dining room was closed most nights." "Where did it lead?" Phoebe asked. "From the old supper pantry. Dishes went through, so they stayed hot." "Was it sealed?" Nell hesitated. 2 winters ago, carpenters worked in that wall. Pritchard's gaze sharpened. "Who employed them?" "Mr. Brierly. They came after supper, because Lady Maud said dust unsettled His Grace." Phoebe felt the answer settle into place. "Did you ever hear anything inside the wall?" Nell looked toward the panel. "Sliding. Sometimes before dinner. I thought it was rats." "Did anyone tell you to say that?" The girl's face went pale. "No." Phoebe softened her voice. "You are not in trouble. Will I be sent away, not for telling the truth?" Phoebe looked at Pritchard. The butler gave one grave nod. Only then did Nell breathe again. Pritchard sent her onward, then unlocked the small tool cabinet near the pantry. "We will not break the wall," he said. "We will lift only what has already been moved." Phoebe nodded. "And we record who is present." Cedric arrived before they began. He wore no coat, only a dark waistcoat over his shirt, as though he had dressed while crossing the corridor. He took in the chalk fragments, the oil, and Pritchard's tools. It was opened. "Yes, Your Grace," Phoebe said. After midnight, his attention moved to the panel. "Open it, with witnesses," she said. "Pritchard is here, and no one else. That may be enough, but we should say aloud what each of us sees before anyone touches it." Cedric looked at her for a long moment. "You expect the discovery to be challenged?" "I expect everything in this house to be challenged once it becomes inconvenient." He did not object. Pritchard lifted the loosened moulding with a narrow blade. The panel yielded by less than an inch, then came free from 2 concealed catches. Behind it ran a vertical channel cut into the wood. A polished groove curved toward the ceiling. At the bottom lay a short brass ferrule severed cleanly at one end. Black residue coated its inner rim. No cord remained. Cedric reached toward it. Phoebe raised one hand. Please wait. His jaw tightened, but he stopped. Pritchard wrapped the fitting in a clean square of linen before lifting it. Horsehair could pass through this, he said. Not the red worsted line, Phoebe replied. Too narrow. Cedric examined the empty channel. Someone removed the cord. Recently, Phoebe said. The oil is fresh. A voice came from behind them, or someone has mistaken old grease for evidence. Brierly stood at the passage entrance. None of them had heard him approach. His coat was immaculate that morning. His cuffs were clean. Cedric did not turn at once. Who told you we were here? No one. I came to supervise the inspection ordered yesterday. You were not summoned. I understood that household mechanisms fall within my duty. Brierly moved closer and looked into the open channel. Rodents often pull out old packing fibers. Phoebe held his gaze. Rodents also cut brass ferrules. That fitting may have been severed during previous repairs. Then the repair ledger should show it. Not every small repair is recorded. This one was hidden behind a fitted panel. His expression cooled. You enjoy making ordinary neglect sound deliberate. You enjoy making deliberate work sound ordinary. Cedric's voice cut between them. Enough, Mr. Brierly, who ordered carpenters into this passage 2 winters ago. Brierly did not look at Nell, which told Phoebe he already knew who had spoken. I do not remember every repair. Try. The old warming recess had warped. I arranged for it to be sealed. At night, to avoid disturbing the household. At Lady Maud's request, a pause. She was concerned for your rest. Cedric looked toward the groove. And the hidden line? There is no hidden line. Phoebe indicated the ferrule. There was. Brierly's eyes hardened. That is speculation. Then why was the panel opened last night? Perhaps your mark was disturbed by cleaning. No one cleans this passage after midnight. Pritchard spoke quietly, and no one was assigned here. Brierly turned to Cedric. Your Grace, this inquiry has already given a new maid influence beyond her station. If every scratch in the wall becomes proof of conspiracy, the household will cease to function. Cedric's face became still. The household will function better when my orders belong to me. Brierly bowed, but the movement lacked submission. As you wish. You will leave the passage, Your Grace? Now. Brierly withdrew. Phoebe listened until his footsteps faded. Cedric looked at the exposed channel. I want the wall opened from floor to ceiling. Not today, Phoebe said. His head turned sharply. You object again. Yes, someone has removed evidence from my house and returned last night to prepare the channel. Which is why we should expose it. Which is why we should not tell them what else we know. Cedric's restraint thinned. You ask me to leave a concealed mechanism in place. I ask you to let the person using it believe we found only an abandoned fitting. That is a risk. So is announcing where to remove the rest. Pritchard remained silent, but his attention moved between them. Cedric looked toward the black oil. What do you propose? Replace the panel. Make a new mark where it cannot be seen. Keep the ferrule elsewhere. Watch the passage. If someone opens it again, we will know the mechanism is being prepared for use, not merely dismantled. And if they remove everything before we catch them, then they confirm there is something worth removing. He stared at her. Waiting cost him more than anger did. Phoebe could see it in the way his shoulders held still. At last, he said, until tomorrow evening. That is fair. It is not fairness. No, it is trust. The word changed his expression. He looked away first. At supper, the cracked pewter plate rested beside the bread, but Phoebe remained standing. Cedric ate roast chicken and carrots while the visible bell pull hung untouched beside his chair. "Your father taught you to examine causes," he said. "He taught me not to name a cause before the symptoms agreed." "Was he always patient?" "No, he was simply willing to be corrected." Cedric looked at her. A rare virtue. He found it inconvenient. "And you?" "I find being corrected less dangerous than being certain for the wrong reason." His gaze dropped to her hand as she reached for the breadbasket. A faint burn remained across one fingertip from the kitchen. "You injured yourself." "Barely. How?" "Nell's cloth slipped when I changed it." "You gave her your linen." "She needed it." Cedric extended his hand, then stopped before touching hers. The restraint was so deliberate that Phoebe felt it more than contact. "Does it pain you?" he asked. "No." He lowered his hand. "I have spent 10 years believing uncertainty meant I should act quickly before someone else corrected me. That is what fear does when it is dressed as authority." His eyes lifted to hers. "And what does trust do? It leaves room for another person to be right." The answer remained between them. Then a faint scrape came from the service wall. Cedric began to rise. Phoebe shook her head once. He stayed seated. They listened. The scrape stopped. A moment later, the dining room bell rang. Neither had touched the cord. Cedric's face hardened, but he did not move. Phoebe watched the lower edge of the panel. A thin thread of fresh black oil crept onto the floorboard. "They opened it again," she said. Cedric looked at the bell pull, then at her. "You were right. The admission cost him." Phoebe heard it. "Not yet," she replied. "We only know someone returned. And tomorrow we learn what they intend the house to believe." Cedric announced the supper before breakfast. And by 9 o'clock, the whole of Norcombe Hall understood that the dining room would receive guests for the first time in 10 years. The news moved faster than any official instruction. Mrs. Pike began revising the menu before Mr. Pritchard had finished reading the list of names. 2 estate trustees would attend. Sir Thomas Greaves had accepted. Lord and Lady Pemberton were already in Hampshire. Lady Maud and Felicity would of course be present. The table would seat 8. The household spoke of the event as though the house itself had been summoned to account. Phoebe heard it first from Nell, who arrived in the pantry carrying folded napkins and nearly dropped them when she said, "They say His Grace is opening the dining room properly." "It has never been closed," Phoebe replied. "Not with people in it." Nell lowered her voice. "Mrs. Weatherby says it proves he is recovering." Phoebe looked toward the service wall, where the hidden panel had been replaced and marked beneath the molding. "That depends upon what the evening is meant to prove." Before noon, Cedric summoned her to the morning room. Lady Maud sat near the fire in plum silk, Felicity beside her in pale gold. Mr. Pritchard stood at the writing desk with the guest list. Cedric remained near the window, one hand resting against the frame. "Miss Larkin," he said, "the dining room will be used tomorrow evening." Lady Maud smiled as though the decision belonged partly to her. A small return to society, nothing exhausting. Cedric did not look at her. "Sir Thomas and the trustees will attend." Phoebe understood at once. "Witnesses." Felicity turned her head. What an unusual word for dinner. "Not if the household has begun writing events before they happen," Phoebe said. Lady Maud's expression softened with concern. "Cedric, this is exactly what I feared. The girl sees conspiracy in every delay." Cedric's gaze remained on Phoebe. "Do you believe the supper should be cancelled?" "No." That answer surprised him. "Why not?" "Because retreat will confirm every story already told about you." Felicity looked toward Lady Maud, then back to Cedric. No one has told stories. Phoebe met her eyes. You asked a footman whether I interpret his grace's wishes. Felicity gave a light laugh. I asked a harmless question. Harmless questions do not travel through 3 departments before luncheon. The smile thinned. Servants gossip. They repeat what gives rank permission. Cedric's attention sharpened. Lady Maud set down her teacup. Miss Larkin forgets herself. No, Cedric said. She remembers what was said. He turned toward Pritchard. The supper proceeds. Lady Maud folded her hands. Then we should make it dignified. The silver service, the blue porcelain, and the full candle arrangement. No orchestra, no extra guests, no speeches. You are determined to make courage look severe. Dining, in my own house, should not require courage. Felicity studied Phoebe. And what role will Miss Larkin play? She will assist with supper service, Cedric said. How reassuring. Felicity's tone was smooth. Then, if His Grace gives an instruction no one remembers, she can tell us what he meant. The insult was polished enough to pass for wit. Phoebe felt the room turn toward her. Cedric did not answer for her. He waited. I have never told anyone what His Grace meant, Phoebe said. Only what he did not do. Felicity's eyes hardened, a distinction convenient to a woman who wishes to become necessary. Cedric's voice changed. My servants are not furnished for your amusement. I meant no harm. Then you may stop before meaning catches up with consequence. Lady Maud rose. Felicity, come. We have arrangements to review. At the door, she looked back at Cedric. The trustees will notice how much influence this maid has gained. Then they may also notice who keeps describing observation as influence. After they left, silence held the room. Cedric looked at Phoebe. You warned me witnesses can be prepared. They already are. Then we prepare better. No, he frowned. Explain. If you rehearse your responses, they will call it performance. If you remove people from the room, they will call it concealment. Let every witness say what they saw before anyone interprets it. Pritchard nodded slowly. A sequence of statements. Yes, Phoebe said. If a bell sounds, His Grace should not react at once. Ask what the board showed. Ask who touched which chord. Ask what time it occurred. Do not let Lady Maud answer before the servants do. Cedric absorbed the advice. And you? I should not become the only person asked. Because they will say, I rely upon you. Because truth becomes fragile when it depends upon favor. The words landed between them. Cedric looked toward the empty chair beside the writing desk, then back at her. You believe I favor your word. I believe you listen to it. That is not the same answer. Phoebe held his gaze. Then I will not answer a question that may become more important than tomorrow. Something moved in his expression, disappointment mixed with respect. Very well. Pritchard cleared his throat. Your Grace, should the cracked pewter plate be set? Cedric looked toward the dining room doors. No. Phoebe had not expected relief to touch her so quickly. Why not? She asked. Because Julian's memory is not evidence for guests. He paused. Place it on the side table. Visible, not served. Phoebe inclined her head. That is wise. You sound surprised. I am learning not to. By the following afternoon, Norcombe Hall had divided into 2 kinds of movement. The visible kind involved silver, linen, coal, candles, and hot dishes. The hidden kind involved lowered voices, redirected servants, and instructions delivered without initials. Phoebe watched both. Mr. Hales and Mr. Vickery, 2 footmen she had seen speaking privately with Brierly, replaced younger men assigned by Pritchard. Who changed the positions? She asked. Pritchard's mouth tightened. Mr. Brierly said experience was required. Did you approve? I was informed after the alteration. Phoebe looked toward the service passage. Restore your own assignments. He will object. Then let him object in writing. Pritchard considered, then gave the order. Near 4:00, Felicity entered the service passage alone. She found Phoebe testing the visible dining room cord with Pritchard present. Still studying his Grace's habits? Felicity asked. Phoebe released the cord. The mechanism. Of course. Mechanical things do not become intimate because a woman understands them. Felicity smiled. A maid seated at a duke's table should be cautious about what she calls intimate. Footsteps sounded behind them. Cedric appeared at the far end of the passage. Felicity turned with practiced brightness. Cedric, I was only admiring Miss Larkin's confidence. Then admire it elsewhere. His gaze moved to Phoebe. Is the visible cord secure? The visible one is? Felicity repeated the words softly. The visible one. Cedric did not explain. That refusal unsettled her more than a defense would have. She left without another remark. As the hour approached, candles were lit one by one. The dining room no longer resembled a tomb. It resembled a tribunal disguised as hospitality. The cracked pewter plate rested on the side table beside a folded napkin. Phoebe stood in the pantry alcove while guests arrived. Sir Thomas greeted Cedric without false cheer. The trustees watched more than they spoke. Lady Maud moved among them with calm assurance. Felicity smiled often and listened carefully. Brierly remained near the service desk, with a leather folio beneath his arm. Pritchard noticed it too. 10 minutes before 8, he drew Phoebe behind the pantry screen and opened the folio just enough to show a folded memorandum. This was left on the service desk, he whispered. Phoebe read the first line. At 9 minutes past 8, His Grace shouted for the candles to be extinguished and ordered the wine removed. She looked toward the clock. It was only 10 minutes before 8. Who wrote this? No signature. Then the supper has already been recorded. Pritchard's face went pale. What do we do? Phoebe looked through the narrow opening. Cedric stood at the head of the table with every guest facing him. Every servant waited for the first signal. She met his gaze and gave the smallest possible shake of her head. He understood that something had changed. Before he could speak, 4 ivory markers dropped at once on the call board behind her. Dining room, morning room, West Library, blue bedchamber. The bells began ringing together. The bells struck together with such force that Lady Pemberton dropped her spoon. Before the first course had been served, in the pantry passage, 4 ivory markers hung below the board, each pointing to a different room. The sound rolled through the walls, stopped, then began again from the dining room line. Phoebe saw Mr. Pritchard reach toward the board and stop himself. Cedric stood at the head of the table with both hands visible against the polished wood. He had not touched the cord. No one moves, he said. His voice carried into the service passage. Mr. Hales entered anyway, holding the fish course. Vickery followed with a wine stand. Your Grace, you rang for the next course, Hazel said. Cedric looked at the empty soup plates. I did not. Vickery hesitated. The board showed the dining room twice. For wine, Hazel's added, and once for the fish. Lady Maud folded her napkin with careful precision. Cedric, perhaps the calls were made before we sat. They were not. Felicity turned toward the guests with a faint smile that invited them to share her concern. The household has been unsettled lately. Phoebe understood at once. The rumor had already prepared the room. Cedric looked toward the pantry opening. For one brief moment, the old uncertainty returned to his face. Then he remembered their agreement. Miss Larkin, he said, What did you observe? Every guest turned toward her. Phoebe stepped into the dining room. 4 markers fell at once: dining room, morning room, west library, and blue bedchamber. No visible cord moved. Brierly advanced from the service desk. A maid should not be interpreting household mechanisms before guests. Cedric did not look at him. She was asked what she saw. Phoebe held out the unsigned memorandum. This was found before the bells rang. It states that at 9 minutes past 8, your grace would shout for the candles to be extinguished and order the wine removed. Sir Thomas Greaves extended one hand. May I see it? Brierly stepped between him and Phoebe. It is a rough service note. Then there should be no objection, Sir Thomas said. Pritchard took the paper from Phoebe and passed it to the magistrate. The clock on the mantel showed 3 minutes past 8. Sir Thomas read the line twice. This describes an event 6 minutes in the future. Lady Maud's expression remained composed, or the time was entered carelessly. The ink was dry when we found it, Phoebe said, and the handwriting does not match Mr. Pritchard or the footman assigned to service. Felicity looked at her. You seem remarkably familiar with everyone's hand. I became familiar after records began describing orders. His Grace had not given. Brierly's eyes hardened. Before he could speak, the dining room bell sounded again. A footman appeared carrying candle snuffers. Your Grace ordered the candles put out. Several guests turned toward Cedric. He had not moved. Another servant entered with hot water. A third came to remove the wine. The confusion unfolded exactly as the memorandum predicted. Lady Maud did not watch the servants. She watched the trustees. Felicity watched Cedric. Brierly watched Phoebe. Cedric raised one hand. Stop. The room quieted by degrees. No servant will act until Mr. Pritchard states what the board showed and who witnessed it. Pritchard checked the markers. Dining room twice. Morning room once. West library once. Blue bedchamber once. The visible dining room cord has not moved. Felicity spoke softly enough to sound reluctant, but Miss Larkin has been telling everyone that His Grace's commands are not to be trusted. Phoebe turned toward her. I have said no such thing. You told the staff only you could distinguish what he did from what others claimed. No, I told His Grace that no one person should become the only interpreter. How convenient, Felicity said. You sit at his table, answer questions before his guests, and now the servants wait for your version before obeying him. The accusation landed because it repeated what she had already ceded below stairs. Lady Maud looked at Cedric with sorrow sharpened into purpose. This is what I feared. The girl has made herself necessary by teaching you to doubt everyone else. Brierly opened the leather folio. There are statements supporting that concern. He withdrew several folded pages. 3 servants report that Miss Larkin instructed them to obey only her account of His Grace's intentions. Mr. Hales lowered his eyes. Vickery stared at the carpet. A young kitchen maid stood near the passage door, pale and rigid. Phoebe took 1 page when Cedric held it out. The words were legalistic, but not identical. Each statement repeated the phrase, private influence over His Grace's interpretation. Another phrase appeared twice. Financial expectation arising from future favor. Phoebe looked up. These servants did not write this independently. Brierly gave a short laugh. You can tell from a glance. A kitchen maid, a footman, and a pantry servant do not naturally choose the same phrase about private influence. They were assisted in expressing themselves. By whom? He did not answer. Sir Thomas looked toward the servants. Did each of you sign willingly? Hales looked at Brierly before replying. That glance told Phoebe more than the words that followed. "Yes, sir." Felicity leaned back, satisfied. There. Must every answer be called false, merely because Miss Larkin dislikes it? Cedric looked at Phoebe. The room seemed to narrow around the silence. "Did you tell any servant to obey only you?" he asked. "No." "Did you promise advancement or money?" "No." "Did you tell them to disregard my commands?" "Never." Cedric held her gaze. "I believe you." The words landed before the guests, the trustees, Lady Maud, Felicity, and Brierly. Phoebe felt relief, but it was followed at once by dread. Cedric turned toward the service passage. "At dawn, every bell cord in this wing will be cut. Every secondary passage will be locked. No servant will answer any signal until the system is removed." Phoebe's breath caught. "Your Grace." "No." His eyes moved to her. "This ends tonight. It destroys the evidence. It prevents another performance and proves only that you can silence the house." A murmur moved along the table. Cedric's face hardened. "I will not allow you or my servants to remain exposed to a mechanism I do not control." "You are controlling us now." The words struck the room more sharply than the bells. Lady Maud's expression softened with something close to satisfaction. Cedric stepped away from the table. "Miss Larkin, you asked me to tell you what I observed. I observed that the hidden line is still active. If you cut every cord, whoever built it can claim nothing was ever there. I will not leave it in place. Then guard the rooms, mark the lines, record every movement. Do not destroy what could clear you." "Enough." His voice did not rise, but the finality hurt more than anger. "The order stands." Phoebe looked at him and understood the shape of his fear. He believed her innocence. He believed the mechanism existed. Yet when uncertainty became unbearable, he reached for the same weapon Lady Maud had used against him. Command first, questions afterward. Phoebe removed the service apron from around her waist. She folded it once and placed it on the sideboard beside Julian's cracked pewter plate. Cedric's expression changed. "What are you doing?" "Leaving supper service." "I have not dismissed you." "No, I am dismissing myself from this duty." His voice lowered. "Because I chose to protect you. Because you chose for everyone after asking me to help you see clearly. The mechanism is dangerous. So is making certainty by force. Do not do this before them." Phoebe looked at the witnesses who had watched her called ambitious, improper, and manipulative. They were permitted to watch everything else. Felicity's confidence faltered. Sir Thomas sat very still. Pritchard's face held quiet alarm. Phoebe turned back to Cedric. "You believe my words, Your Grace. You do not believe my judgment. That is not trust." Pain moved through his face before control returned. "I am trying to keep you safe. Then ask what safety costs me." He had no answer. Phoebe placed her hands at her sides so no one would see them tremble. "I will not become the quiet voice you obey in place of all the other voices you fear." She bowed to him, then to the table. "My apologies for leaving before supper." No one stopped her as she crossed the service passage. Behind her, Cedric ordered the memorandum preserved, and the servants questioned separately. His voice was steady again. That hurt more than if it had broken. Before dawn, workmen entered the west wing with ladders and cutting tools. Phoebe had not slept. She stood with Pritchard beside the call board as the visible dining room cord was severed. The line slackened to the floor. One marker dropped. Then another. The dining room marker fell last, although the cord lay cut beneath it. Every man in the passage froze. A second connection still pulled from inside the wall. Phoebe moved before anyone recovered. She reached into the narrow opening where the molding had been removed and closed her fingers around a hidden brass ferrule. It was warm with fresh friction. She slipped it into her pocket before Brierly entered the passage. By sunrise, the bells were silent. The service doors were locked, and Phoebe's trunk stood ready. She left Norcombe Hall through the servants' entrance, carrying no silver, no promise, and no command from a duke. Only the severed brass fitting rested in her pocket, proof that the house had spoken after Cedric's cord was cut. Winchester received Phoebe beneath a low grey sky, and the smell of rain lifting from the stone streets. Mrs. Dacre's apothecary stood near the cathedral, close beneath a painted mortar and pestle, its windows crowded with blue glass bottles, folded packets, and jars of dried leaves. Phoebe had not crossed the threshold in 6 years. She had expected the room to feel smaller. Instead, it felt like the only place in England where no one had first learned to measure her by a servant's cap. Mrs. Dacre came from behind the counter before Phoebe could explain why she had arrived with a trunk and no carriage following. She took one look at Phoebe's face and said, "You look like your father when he had decided not to be sensible. I hope that is affection." It is. Sensibility is praised most loudly by people who benefit from your silence. The words nearly undid her. Mrs. Dacre saw it and did not ask for tears. She sent the shop boy upstairs with the trunk, placed a bowl of hot stew before Phoebe in the back parlour, and waited until she had eaten half before asking what had happened at Norcombe Hall. Phoebe told her about the bells, the hidden groove, the false memorandum, the coached statements, and Cedric's order to cut every cord. She described leaving before sunrise with the brass ferrule in her pocket. She did not speak first of the moment he had looked wounded when she removed her apron. That came later, after the fire had settled and the silence became honest enough to hold it. "He believed I had not lied," Phoebe said, "but he still decided my judgment was expendable." Mrs. Dacre stirred the fire with the poker. Men with power often think belief is the generous part. It was not enough. No. Phoebe looked down at her hands. "I miss him, Mrs." Dacre did not soften the truth. "That does not make leaving wrong. I do not miss the house." "What do you miss?" Phoebe saw a candlelit table, a cracked pewter plate, and Cedric breaking bread in half before placing one portion opposite him. "The moment he made room," she said. "Not for a maid, for an answer." Mrs. Dacre studied her over the rim of her spectacles. "And what frightens you?" "That if I return, I will become useful again before I become respected." The older woman nodded once. "Then do not return until usefulness is no longer the price of being heard." Phoebe drew the ferrule from her pocket and placed it on the table. In daylight, it appeared ordinary. The cut end was clean. Black residue clung inside the narrow opening. Mrs. Dacre lifted it with a folded cloth and turned it toward the window. "There is a mark here." Phoebe leaned closer. Near the rim, almost hidden beneath the oil, a tiny impression resembled 2 crossed lines inside a circle. A maker's stamp, likely. Mrs. Dacre set it down. Amos Bell used a similar mark when he had the workshop near Kingsgate. "You know him?" "I knew his wife. He still repairs church pulls and domestic lines." They carried the ferrule to his workshop before noon. Mr. Amos Bell was a compact man with white whiskers and hands permanently darkened by oil. He examined the fitting beneath a lamp, then rubbed the stamped edge with chalk. The crossed lines became clearer. "That is mine," he said. "Or rather, it was. I stopped using the mark years ago." Phoebe kept her voice steady. "Did you install this at Norcombe Hall?" Mr. Bell looked at her. "I installed many fittings in Hampshire." "Do you remember a double-action servant bell line?" Not from looking at one ferrule. He tested the opening with a narrow gauge, too fine for worsted cord. Could take silk, gut, or horsehair. Black horsehair? Yes. Would it carry a secondary pull through an old wall channel? It could. Phoebe felt certainty rise and stopped it before it became assumption. Do you keep ledgers? Mr. Bell's expression became guarded. Old ones. He led them to a shelf at the rear of the workshop and brought down a cracked volume. The entries were written in a cramped hand, organized by date and job code rather than household name. They searched the year. Cedric's household records suggested the renovations had occurred. At last, Phoebe found 3 entries under the same code. 3 pulley boxes, brass ferrules, 12 yards of black horsehair line, replacement ivory drops. The account named no destination. The next page had been cut out close to the binding. Mr. Bell frowned. That was not missing when I last balanced the book. When was that? Mrs. Dacre asked. Years ago. Phoebe touched the coded entry. What does NHT mean? It could be an estate code. He shook his head. I will not pretend certainty. Who paid? The account copy would say. Where is that? Delivery books were kept by my apprentice, Thomas Greeley. He left the trade after his hand stiffened. Mrs. Dacre spoke before Phoebe could. His sister married the stationer near the east gate. Mr. Bell looked surprised. You remember everyone. Only people who owe invoices. By mid-afternoon, they stood in the back room of the stationer's shop while Thomas Greeley searched a box of old delivery slips. His right hand curled stiffly at the knuckles, but his memory was sharper than Mr. Bell's. Norcombe, he said when Phoebe described the hidden line. I remember the wall work, not the family. The steward paid privately because he did not want the charge entered with ordinary house repairs. His name? Brierly. E. Brierly. Greeley found a folded copy browned at the edges. The writing listed 3 destinations in abbreviated form. Servants' hall, family sitting room, old supper pantry. Below them ran a maintenance note authorizing replacement parts through estate suppliers. Phoebe read the amounts twice. The payments continued for years. These charges increased after the first installation, she said. Mr. Bell leaned over her shoulder. Pulley weights, cord, fittings, labor. All through suppliers selected by Brierly, Phoebe said. Greeley nodded. He insisted on handling access himself. The motive became visible at last. Cedric's isolation had not merely allowed Brierly to control information. It had given him control over contracts, repairs, and money that passed without direct scrutiny. Will you sign what you remember? Phoebe asked. Greeley looked at the page. Only what I can prove. That is all I want. Mr. Bell agreed to do the same. Neither statement claimed that Lady Maud had ordered the system. Neither claimed every false signal came from Brierly's hand. They recorded the fitting type, the workshop stamp, the coded ledger entry, the 3 destinations, the private payment, and the continuing maintenance charges. The evidence was narrower than certainty. It was stronger because of that. While the men wrote, Phoebe stood near the window and watched rain gather on the glass. She thought of Cedric at the long table, without the bell pull beside him. She wondered whether he had eaten. She hated herself slightly for wondering. Mrs. Dacre joined her. You are thinking of sending the statements. Yes, and returning? No. Phoebe looked at the ferrule in her palm. He must change without believing my presence is the reward. At Norcombe Hall, the silence after the cords were cut proved harder to manage than the bells. Servants crossed long passages with handwritten slips. Trays cooled. Fires went unlit. Brierly blamed disorder. Cedric did not. He gathered Pritchard, Mrs. Pike, Mrs. Weatherby, and the department heads and said, "The disruption comes from my order. No servant will be punished for the consequences of it." Temporary instructions were written, signed, and entered in one ledger. Cedric asked what each department required before deciding how the system would work. Lady Maud called the process theatrical. "You are turning ordinary service into an inquiry," she said in the morning room. "Ordinary service was used to make my commands uncertain, because one maid suggested it." Cedric looked at her. "Because I saw the dining room marker fall after the cord was cut. And yet you sent her away. She left, for which you should be grateful." Cedric's answer came before caution. "I am not." Lady Maud's expression changed. Attachment can make a man confuse loyalty with influence. So can fear. He ended the conversation and went to the dining room. Julian's cracked plate remained on the side table. Phoebe's apron had been removed before dawn, but Cedric could still see where she had placed it. He sat in his usual chair. No tray had been ordered. No bell hung beside his hand. He looked toward the empty place across from him and understood that cutting the cords had not made the house safe. It had only made every person wait for his next command. The packet from Winchester arrived before evening. Phoebe's letter contained no plea and no accusation. She enclosed the signed statements, the copied account, and the maintenance charges tied to Brearley's suppliers. At the bottom, she had written one personal line: "The truth should not depend on whether you favor my word." Now it does not. Cedric read it twice. Mr. Pritchard entered with another document sealed by the estate trustees. It was not a declaration of incapacity. It was notice of a preliminary inquiry under the family settlement, convened to consider whether emergency management provisions should be invoked before any appeal to Chancery. The request had been submitted that morning. It bore Lady Maud's name. Cedric folded the paper with deliberate care. "Send for Mr. Harland." "Yes, Your Grace." Pritchard hesitated. "And Miss Larkin?" Cedric looked at Phoebe's letter. "No command will be sent to her." "Then what shall I say?" "Nothing yet." He turned toward the open dining room door. "First, I will prove I can change without requiring her to stand here and watch me do it." Cedric arrived in Winchester beneath a hard grey sky, with Mr. Harland seated opposite him, and no command written in his pocket. That absence mattered. Before dawn, he had drafted 3 letters asking Phoebe to return. Each had begun politely. Each had ended by placing the decision inside the shape of his need. He burned them all. In the end, he sent only a calling card to Mrs. Dacre's apothecary, requesting an interview at her convenience, when the carriage stopped near the cathedral close. Cedric remained seated for one moment longer than necessary. He could hear wheels over wet stone, a shop bell opening and closing, and a boy calling out the hour from the corner. Ordinary sounds, honest sounds. No hidden line behind a wall. No servant waiting to decide whether he remembered himself correctly. Mr. Harland closed the document case on his knees. "Your Grace, we can answer the trustees without Miss Larkin." Cedric looked toward the blue glass bottles in the apothecary window. "That is not why I am here, Mrs. Dacre received them in the back parlour with the reserve of a woman who had already weighed a duke against his conduct and found the title irrelevant. Phoebe stood near the fire in a dark blue dress. She wore no cap, no apron, no keys at her waist. The change should not have altered her so completely. Yet Cedric saw at once how much the uniform of service had hidden. Not her beauty, her separateness. At Norcombe, every piece of grey cloth had implied that her presence belonged to the household, before it belonged to herself. Here, she appeared no less modest, but entirely her own. He felt the recognition move through him and did not turn it into praise. "Miss Larkin," he said. "Your Grace, Mrs." Dacre indicated the chairs. "I will remain. I expected nothing else." Phoebe sat beside her. Cedric took the chair across from them. Mr. Harland remained near the writing desk with his papers closed. No one offered tea. "You received the trustee notice," Phoebe said. "Yes." "Then Lady Maud has moved quickly. She has requested a preliminary inquiry under the family settlement. The trustees are to consider whether emergency management provisions should be invoked before any petition is made to Chancery." Phoebe's expression remained controlled. "And the supper will be used as evidence." "Yes, so will I." Cedric heard the steadiness in her voice and the hurt beneath it. "Yes." Her fingers closed once around the fabric at her knee. "Then why are you here?" He had rehearsed no answer. That was deliberate. To apologize without asking you to make the apology useful. Phoebe looked at him directly. "Mrs." Dacre glanced toward the fire. Cedric continued. "I believed you had not lied. I believed you had not instructed the servants. I believed the hidden line existed. Then I dismissed your judgment before the same people who had accused you of manipulation." Phoebe said nothing. "I told myself I was protecting you," he went on. "I cut the cords because action felt cleaner than uncertainty. I did not ask what the decision would destroy. I did not ask what it would cost the servants who depended upon the system. I did not ask what it would cost you to be overruled in front of those who had already decided you wanted influence." Her eyes lowered for one moment, then returned to his. "You believed command would prove control." "Yes, and now I know it proved fear." Silence followed. Cedric did not fill it with excuses. Phoebe's voice was quiet. "That is an apology. It is also an admission. They are not the same thing." "No." He reached into his coat and placed a folded document on the table. "Since you left, the household has used written instructions. Every order is signed. Department heads are consulted before routines change. No servant has lost wages because my decision disrupted service. The system continues whether you return or not." Phoebe did not touch the paper. "You brought proof. Words have been used too easily at Norcombe. And you thought this would persuade me. No, I thought you deserved to know that your absence did not end the correction." Something shifted in her expression. Not forgiveness. Something closer to relief that she did not have to supply. Cedric looked at the brass ferrule resting beside a bottle on the mantel. "I received the statements from Mr. Bell and Mr. Greeley. They prove only what they saw and recorded, which is why they are strong." He glanced toward Mr. Harland. The solicitor opened the document case and withdrew copies of the coded ledger, the delivery account, and the maintenance charges. The payments through Brierley's selected suppliers continued for years, Cedric said. They increased after Julian died. Phoebe's eyes sharpened. Then his motive was not only obedience to Lady Maud. No, my withdrawal from direct estate oversight allowed him to control repair contracts, access to rooms, and commissions that never reached me. Mr. Harland added, "The sums are not enough to explain the entire scheme by themselves, but they show personal benefit." Phoebe rose and crossed to the writing desk. She returned with the original ferrule, Mr. Bell's statement, and Thomas Greeley's delivery copy. "There is still a missing step," she said. "The family sitting room is not named." Cedric looked at the abbreviation. FSR, Mr. Greeley remembers only that the room belonged to a senior female member of the family. Lady Maud's former. Sitting room is the only one aligned with the old supper pantry wall. Likely, Phoebe said. Not proved. Cedric felt the old urge to seize the likely answer and command it into fact. He let it pass. Then we prove it. Phoebe studied him. How? You tell me. Her brows drew together. You are asking me to direct the inquiry. You understand the sequence, the walls, and the evidence better than I do. And if I disagree with you, then you disagree. Before servants, if necessary. Before trustees, if necessary. Before Lady Maud. Cedric held her gaze, especially then. For the first time, Phoebe's face softened, only slightly. Enough to show that she had heard the difference between permission and commitment. A live reconstruction, she said, at Norcombe. Yes, with the original grooves visible. Yes, and every stage witnessed. Who do you require? Mr. Bell, Mr. Greeley, if he can travel, Mr. Pritchard, Sir Thomas, the trustees, selected servants from the dining room and call board. Mrs. Dacre. Mrs. Dacre looked pleased rather than surprised. I had wondered when my name would become inconvenient. Phoebe continued. No servant may be dismissed, docked wages, threatened through references, or transferred because of testimony. Agreed, in writing. Cedric looked toward Harland. Prepare it today. The solicitor nodded, and no wall, cord, panel, or household routine is altered without notice to those examining it, Phoebe said. Cedric understood that the condition reached beyond mechanics. Agreed. You say that quickly, because I should have said it sooner. She looked at him for a long moment. You have not asked me to return. No. Why? The question was not soft. It was more dangerous than anger, because he knew the truthful answer might cost him what remained between them. Because I do not want you to come back as proof that I have been forgiven. Phoebe's breath changed. Cedric continued. Nor do I want you to return, because I need your judgment and know no better way to obtain it. That would make your usefulness the price of your place again. Mrs. Dacre looked down at her hands. Phoebe remained very still. Then what are you asking? For your help as an independent witness. You would stay in the East guest rooms. Mrs. Dacre would accompany you. Your expenses would be paid through Mr. Harland, not through household wages. You would answer to no steward or housekeeper. And if the inquiry fails, you leave when you choose. And if it succeeds? Cedric felt the question reach the place where hope had become dangerous. You still leave when you choose. Phoebe looked toward the fire. I told Mrs. Dacre I feared returning would make me useful before it made me respected. Then do not return for respect from me alone. Cedric's voice lowered. Return because the servants who were used against you deserve the truth, and because the truth should not depend upon whether I favor your word. Her own sentence, returned without claim. Phoebe crossed to the mantel and lifted the ferule. She placed it in his open palm. Their fingers almost touched. Cedric did not close the distance. I will return under those conditions, she said. Relief moved through him so quickly that he had to draw one careful breath before answering. Thank you. Do not thank me yet. Why? Because the truth may cost your family name. Cedric closed his fingers around the brass. Then the name will bear what it allowed. Mr. Harland unfolded the delivery copy once more. Beneath the 3 destinations, a final instruction had been written in faded ink. Phoebe leaned closer. Cedric read it aloud. Connect through original dining room channel. Preserve appearance of ordinary service. The room went silent. The mechanism had never been intended merely to ring a bell. It had been designed to make deception look routine. Phoebe returned to Norcombe Hall 2 days later beneath the main portico, not through the servants' entrance. Mr. Pritchard waited at the top of the steps with Mrs. Weatherby and 2 footmen, the east guest room keys resting on a silver tray between them. The distinction was deliberate, so was the silence. Mrs. Dacre stepped down, first from the carriage, then turned, while Phoebe followed, in her dark blue travelling dress. Mrs. Weatherby looked at the absence of a cap, the absence of an apron, and finally at the keys. Mrs. Dacre and Miss Larkin will occupy the east guest rooms, Pritchard said, by His Grace's instruction. Mrs. Weatherby's mouth tightened. Miss Larkin is no longer attached to the household staff. No. Phoebe met the housekeeper's eyes. I have returned as an independent witness. No apology came. Phoebe had expected none. Mrs. Weatherby stepped aside. As Phoebe crossed the entrance hall, she saw Lady Maud standing at the upper gallery rail. Felicity stood beside her. The older woman's face remained composed, but her hand closed around the carved wood. A servant who had left through the lower door had returned beneath the family portico and been given a guest room. Society might call it improper. The household understood it as a reversal of rank. Cedric waited in the morning room with Mr. Harland, Pritchard, Mrs. Pike, Mrs. Weatherby, and the heads of the remaining departments. He rose when Phoebe entered. He did not cross the room. That restraint was the first proof that the promise made in Winchester had survived the journey. Miss Larkin, Mrs. Dacre, Your Grace, they answered. The temporary service ledger lay open on the table. Beside it stood a stack of signed instruction slips. Cedric looked at the gathered servants. Before we discuss the reconstruction, I owe this household an acknowledgement. Mrs. Weatherby shifted. Mrs. Pike folded her arms. Pritchard remained still. I ordered the bell cords cut without consulting those who depended upon them. Cedric said, I believed decisive action would make the house safer. Instead, it disrupted work, damaged evidence, and placed the burden of my fear upon people who did not create it. No one spoke. Cedric did not look toward Phoebe for approval. That was my error. It will not be repeated. Mrs. Pike gave one slow nod. Cedric continued, Until the system is examined and rebuilt, every instruction will be written and signed. Any permanent change will be discussed with the department it affects. No servant will lose wages, position, or reference because of truthful testimony concerning the bells. Mr. Brierly, or any member of my family. Mrs. Weatherby looked up sharply. Even if the testimony concerns Lady Maud, especially then. Lady Maud's voice came from the doorway. How noble! She entered in dark green silk, Felicity behind her. You gather servants to witness your humiliation and call it reform. Cedric closed the ledger before turning. I gather them because they work in this house. Lady Maud's gaze moved to Phoebe. And she returns as what? A guest? An expert? A woman who has learned that accusation is the quickest staircase in England. Phoebe answered before Cedric could. A witness, my lady. Nothing more is required. Nothing more has ever seemed to stop you. Cedric's voice hardened. You will not speak to her that way in my house. Your house. Lady Maud glanced around the room. A house now governed through a maid's suspicions. No, governed through evidence and responsibility. Felicity stepped forward. The trustees will not be impressed by theatrical apology. Then they may examine the records. Cedric turned back to the department heads. Proceed. Lady Maud remained long enough to make her refusal to leave conspicuous, then withdrew with Felicity. The room breathed more freely after the door closed. Pritchard opened the ledger and briefly described the temporary system. Mrs. Pike requested a fixed collection time for kitchen orders. The head housemaid asked that the guest wing and family rooms use separate runners. Cedric asked what each change would require, then approved only what the servants said could be managed without overburdening the younger staff. The discussion lasted less than 20 minutes. It was not dramatic. That was why Phoebe trusted it. Reform that existed only in speeches would not survive supper. When the department heads began to leave, Nell remained near the door, twisting the edge of her apron. Phoebe noticed first. "You wished to speak." Nell looked at Cedric and nearly lost her courage. He stepped away from the table. "You may address Miss Larkin, if that is easier." The girl swallowed. "Mr. Brierly told me what to say after the supper." Phoebe kept her voice gentle. "About the bells?" Nell nodded. "He said I was to tell everyone." His grace rang again, and then shouted that no one obeyed him. Cedric's face became very still. "Did you hear me shout?" "No, Your Grace." "Did you see me touch the cord?" "No." "Why did you sign the statement?" Tears filled Nell's eyes, but she blinked them back. "He said my place would be gone by morning. He said no respectable house would take a scullery maid called dishonest." Phoebe moved nearer without touching her. "You do not have to testify before the trustees unless you choose to." Cedric looked at Phoebe, surprised. Her statement matters. So does her freedom to give it. He absorbed the correction. Then he turned to Nell. "Miss Larkin is right. You will not be compelled. Your wages and reference are protected whether you speak or remain silent." Nell looked from one to the other. "I want to tell them." "Then you will," Phoebe said. "And you will not stand alone." Pritchard brought out an ivory marker found behind loose plaster near the old board. It was yellowed at the edges and scratched along one side. Cedric lifted it toward the window. "There is a crescent here." Phoebe joined him. The mark was shallow, almost rubbed away. "Julian carved it," Cedric said. His voice softened despite the room around him. "He marked his things with half a moon, because he said a full one looked too pleased with itself." Phoebe glanced toward the cracked pewter plate on the side table, the same imperfect crescent repeated in the ivory. Then this marker came from the original dining room system, not a later repair. Mr. Harland opened his notebook. "That places the concealed connection before Lord Julian's death." The room grew quiet. Lady Maud had always described the confusion as a consequence of Cedric's grief. The marker suggested the mechanism had existed before grief made him vulnerable to it. Cedric placed the ivory drop beside the ferrule. "The trustees must see both. And Mr. Bell should compare the wear," Phoebe said. "If the groove matches the hidden line, the evidence becomes harder to dismiss." Harland took out another set of papers. "There is more." He spread several supplier accounts across the table. Each bore Brierly's approval. The cost of bell fittings, pulley weights, wall access, and private repair labor had increased after Julian's death. "These amounts are modest individually," Harland said. "Together, they show a pattern. Mr. Brierly controlled the suppliers, the repairs, and access to the service walls. His commissions rose while his grace withdrew from direct oversight." Pritchard's expression darkened. He profited from keeping the house dependent upon him. "And from keeping Cedric uncertain," Phoebe said. The first name escaped before she could prevent it. The room seemed to hear it. Cedric did not correct her. His gaze met hers, and something quiet passed between them. Not intimacy claimed, intimacy recognized and restrained. Pritchard entered again, a few minutes later, with a message from the stable yard. "Your Grace, Mr. Brierly is not in his rooms. His traveling case is gone." Cedric's hand tightened once at his side. "What else is missing?" the prepared memoranda from the service desk. 2 duplicate pulley weights were found beneath his office cabinet. Mr. Harland closed the supplier accounts. He may be attempting to leave. Cedric's first impulse appeared in the sharp turn of his head toward the door. He stopped himself. What can be done without stripping the household of staff? Pritchard considered. 2 grooms can check the station. The stable boy can watch the North Road. No more. Do it. Phoebe saw the difference. Once, Cedric would have sent half the staff chasing his anger. Now he asked what the house could bear. That evening, after the witnesses' protections had been signed, Cedric found Phoebe near the reopened dining room doors. The cracked pewter plate rested on the side table. "Will you take supper here?" he asked. Phoebe looked at the chair opposite his. "Not yet." His face changed, but he did not argue. "Because the truth is not established. Because I need to know the changes remain when I do not reward them." He accepted the words without defense. "Then I will wait." A stable boy returned after dark, mud to his knees and breathless from running. He had not seen Brierly at the station or on the North Road. He had seen him enter Lady Maud's disused morning room, carrying a coil of black horsehair. The disused morning room had been closed for years, yet a fresh line of black oil marked the baseboard behind Lady Maud's cabinet. Cedric stood in the doorway with Phoebe, Mr. Harland, Mr. Pritchard, Mrs. Dacre, and the stable boy who had seen Brierly enter with the coil of horsehair. The room smelled of cold ashes, lavender sachets, and furniture kept beneath linen covers. Nothing else appeared disturbed. That was what made the oil seem deliberate. "Show us where he went," Cedric said. The stable boy pointed toward the cabinet. "Behind there, Your Grace." He was carrying the cord under his coat. Cedric looked at Pritchard rather than ordering the furniture moved himself. "Can it be shifted without damaging the wall?" "Yes, Your Grace." 2 footmen were called and instructed to move the cabinet 6 inches from the paneling. Behind it sat a small wooden door, no larger than a ledger cover, fitted so carefully into the wall that only the fresh oil betrayed it. The latch opened beneath Pritchard's hand. Inside were 2 brass pulleys, a narrow iron guide, and a channel descending into the wall. The grooves were clean. The cord was gone. Mr. Harland crouched near the opening without touching it, recently removed. Phoebe held the ferrule beside the lower fitting. The width matched exactly. "This is where the secondary line passed." Cedric's face hardened. "To the dining room?" "Partly," Phoebe said. "The delivery copy suggests the line continued through the old supper pantry and the servants' board." Mrs. Dacre examined the edge of the box. "There is a supplier mark." Mr. Harland brought the account sheet closer. The same crossed initials appeared beside 3 entries approved by Brierly. "That links the fittings to his repair contracts," he said. Pritchard looked toward the cold fireplace and explains why he controlled every access request. They searched the room with witnesses present. Beneath the window seat, they found a loose iron hook and a dark stain from horsehair oil. Inside the escritoire lay old correspondence paper, sealing wax, and a folded memorandum listing maintenance charges through 2 suppliers controlled by Brierly. The amounts were modest enough to escape notice individually. Together, they formed a steady private income. "He profited every time the system required repair," Phoebe said. Cedric read the figures, and every time I refused to inspect the house myself. "He needed you uncertain," Harland said, "not merely obedient." Lady Maud entered before the search was complete. She wore dark green silk beneath a heavy shawl and carried a candle, although the corridor behind her was lit. Her gaze moved once over the open pulley box. No surprise touched her face. What is the meaning of this? Cedric turned toward her. A concealed bell line was routed through your sitting room. That box predates the alterations. The supplier mark matches Brierly's accounts. He managed repairs. That was his duty. Phoebe held up the ferrule. The fitting matches the hidden line removed from the dining room wall. Lady Maud looked at her with polished contempt. You have become remarkably skilled at assigning meaning to scraps of brass. Meaning is assigned by connection, my lady. The fitting, the groove, the supplier mark, and the account agree. How fortunate that every object agrees with the woman who discovered it. Cedric stepped nearer, but Phoebe answered first. That is why each object is being examined by others. Lady Maud's eyes narrowed. You presume much. No, I insist upon witnesses. The candle flame trembled in Lady Maud's hand. Cedric, this has gone far enough. You are allowing one woman to convert household decay into accusation. You knew this room contained the mechanism. I knew repairs had been made. Why was a second line necessary? Lady Maud's composure held, but her voice lost some of its softness, because the estate had already suffered once from a master who mistook pride for strength. Cedric's expression changed. You speak of my father. I speak of a scandal you were too young to understand. He nearly lost the confidence of the tenants, the lenders, and half the county because he would not admit disorder until it was public. Her gaze moved toward the pulleys. I learned then that disorder must be contained before truth can be safely examined. So you contained me. I protected the estate by teaching servants not to trust my commands, by making certain no single angry moment could damage House Tresham. Phoebe heard the conviction beneath the defense. Lady Maud did not think of herself as cruel. She thought control was the tax others paid for stability that made her more dangerous, not less. You made uncertainty permanent, Phoebe said. You turned caution into a system. Lady Maud looked at her. A servant cannot understand what a family name carries. A servant understands what happens when powerful people call silence protection. A voice came from the doorway, and a servant may say anything once she is promised advancement. Brierly stood beyond Lady Maud with a leather packet beneath one arm. His coat was damp at the shoulders. He did not look like a man who had fled. He looked like a man who had returned at the moment he had chosen. Cedric held out his hand. Give me the packet. Brierly hesitated, then passed it over. Inside were 6 signed statements accusing Phoebe of offering money, better positions, or favorable references to servants who supported her account of the bells. Cedric read the first page. His face became unreadable. Phoebe asked permission before taking another. The wording was not identical, but 3 phrases repeated across different hands. Private influence over His Grace's interpretation. Expectation of future favor. Improper advancement beyond station. These were dictated, she said. Brierly gave a dry laugh. Because the servants expressed themselves clearly. Because a scullery maid and a footman do not naturally choose the same phrase about private influence. Mr. Harland compared the pages. She is correct. The language suggests a common drafter. A clerk assisted them, Brierly said. Whose clerk? Cedric asked. Brierly did not answer. Nell's voice came from the corridor. His, everyone turned. The girl stood beside Mrs. Pike, pale but upright. Her hands trembled at her sides. Mr. Brierly told me what to say, she said. He said if I used my own words, no one would believe me. Brierly's expression hardened. You are confused. I'm not. Her voice shook, but it did not fail. You said, Miss Larkin wanted money from his grace. You told me to say she promised to make me a housemaid if I signed. Cedric looked at Nell. Did she? No, your grace. Did Miss Larkin offer you anything? Only that I wouldn't lose my place for telling the truth. Brierly turned toward Cedric. You will accept the word of a frightened kitchen girl over a steward who has served your family for 20 years? Rank does not decide credibility. Nell looked at him in surprise. Cedric continued. You will not lose wages, position, or reference. Your testimony is your choice. Brierly's composure cracked at last. This house cannot be governed by servants accusing their superiors. Cedric looked toward the hidden pulley box. It has been governed too long by superiors deciding what servants are permitted to remember. Phoebe stepped nearer the wall. We do not need accusation alone. Everyone turned toward her. We can reconstruct the system. Mr. Harlan's attention sharpened. Explain. Mr. Bell can thread a new line through the original grooves, nothing hidden, every section visible. We test the official dining room pull first. Then the secondary line from this room. Then the delayed route through the old supper pantry, the trustees, Sir Thomas, the servants, and every person whose statement is being used can observe the same sequence. Lady Maud's voice chilled. You propose a spectacle. I propose fact. You propose theatre. Cedric faced his aunt. The theatre began when servants were coached, records were written before events, and my grief was used as scenery. Brierly moved toward the door. Mr. Harland stepped into his path. You will remain available to the inquiry. Cedric did not order him confined. He ordered the room sealed, the accounts copied, and notice sent to Sir Thomas and the trustees. Every step was recorded. Every witness signed. By midnight, Mr. Bell had been summoned for the following evening. Phoebe remained after the others left, checking the sequence of rooms against the delivery copy. Cedric stood beside the exposed wall. You were right to insist upon witnesses, he said. It is no longer enough for either of us to be privately certain. No, the silence between them changed. It was not safe, but it was honest. Cedric looked at her. I love you. Phoebe's breath caught. He continued before she could answer. Not because you cooked one supper. Not because you found the mechanism. I love you because you left rather than become another private voice controlling me. You refuse to make yourself necessary at the cost of your own judgment. The words reached her more deeply because he attached no request to them. I'm not asking you to answer, he said. I'm not asking you to stay. I only refuse to let silence speak for me again. Phoebe held his gaze. Love will matter after the truth can stand without needing romance to support it. Pain crossed his face, followed by understanding. Then tomorrow, it stands first. Together, they looked at the visible groove. Mr. Bell's preliminary thread had reached the servants' call board exactly. Beyond it, the channel continued through the wall toward Lady Maud's room. At 8 o'clock the following evening, the dining room at Norcombe Hall held no supper. The long table had been cleared and arranged instead with 2 severed brass ferules, the crescent-marked ivory drop, Mr. Bell's workshop ledger, Thomas Greeley's delivery copy, Brierly's supplier, accounts, the prepared memorandum from the failed dinner, and the 6 servant statements written in carefully borrowed language. The shutters stood open. The lamps burned steadily. Nothing was concealed except what the walls had concealed for years. Cedric stood near the fireplace with both hands visible. Phoebe stood between the dining room and the service passage, where Mr. Pritchard, Mrs. Pike, Nell, and selected servants waited beside the call board. Sir Thomas Greaves, sat with the estate trustees and Mr. Harland. Lady Maud occupied the far end of the table. Felicity sat beside her, pale and watchful. Brierly stood near the door under the eye of the constable Sir Thomas had asked to attend, not as a prisoner yet, but as a man whose departure would no longer go unnoticed. Mr. Bell held the newly threaded line. Every section had been left visible. The cord ran from the official dining room, pull through the old channel, across the call board toward the supper pantry, and finally into Lady Maud's former sitting room. "The purpose is simple," Phoebe said. Her voice carried into both rooms. "We will determine whether the dining room signal can be produced without His Grace touching the visible cord." Lady Maud's mouth curved faintly, a performance arranged by a woman who has already decided the conclusion. Phoebe turned toward her. "That is why each stage will be repeated by Mr. Bell and witnessed by everyone present." Sir Thomas nodded. "Proceed." Mr. Bell took the official dining room pull. Phoebe looked toward Cedric. "Your Grace, please remain where you are." "I will." His hands stayed at his sides. "One pull," Phoebe said. Mr. Bell drew the visible cord once. In the service passage, the dining room marker dropped. A clear bell sounded. Pritchard called through the open doorway. "One dining room signal received." Mr. Harland recorded the time. Phoebe reset the sequence. Now the visible cord will remain untouched. Mr. Bell crossed to Lady Maud's former sitting room with Sir Thomas and one trustee. The visible reconstruction line ran openly along the wall. Phoebe followed and stopped beside the uncovered pulley box. This route uses the original grooves, the matching fittings, and the destinations listed on the delivery copy. Lady Maud spoke from the adjoining room. "A line installed yesterday proves only that a line can be installed." Phoebe answered without raising her voice. "It proves more when the original wear, the workshop mark, the delivery account, and the fitting dimensions agree." Mr. Bell took the secondary cord. "Ready?" Phoebe asked. "Ready. Pull once." He did. From the dining room came the bell. In the service passage, the dining room marker dropped. Cedric had not moved. No one spoke. The sound faded into a silence heavier than surprise. Phoebe returned to the dining room. The hidden line can produce the official dining room signal. One trustee leaned forward, and the delayed movement recorded before the supper. "We will show it now." Mr. Bell moved to the old supper pantry. The third section had been threaded through the narrow warming recess Nell described. He pulled once. Nothing happened. 1 second passed, then 2, then 3. The visible cord beside Cedric's former chair trembled without being touched. The dining room marker fell. The bell sounded half a breath later. Pritchard called the time. Mr. Harland compared it with the earlier ledger. "The delay matches." Sir Thomas looked at Lady Maud. Not sympathetic movement. Lady Maud's face remained composed. "You have demonstrated a mechanism. You have not demonstrated years of intention." Phoebe lifted the prepared memorandum. "Then we will reproduce one intention already written in advance." Mr. Bell followed the sequence listed on the page. Dining room, morning room, west library, blue bedchamber, wine, candles, hot water. The markers fell in order. Bells sounded. Hales entered with the wine stand. Another footman carried candle snuffers. A maid appeared with hot water. Each stopped before crossing the threshold. The same confusion returned, but this time every movement had been predicted, observed, and controlled. "No command came from His Grace," Phoebe said, yet the household received several. Mr. Harland held up the memorandum. "And this document described those commands before the dinner began." Brierly stepped forward. That proves planning by someone. It does not prove who planned it. Nell entered from the service passage. Her face was pale, but her back was straight. You did? Brierly's expression sharpened. Be careful. Cedric moved one step, then stopped. He did not stand in front of her. He did not answer for her. Nell looked towards Sir Thomas. Mr. Brierly told me what to say after the bells rang. He said I was to tell everyone. His Grace shouted and forgot his own orders. He said if I used different words, no one would believe me. Sir Thomas spoke gently. Were you threatened? He said I'd lose my place and no house would take me with a dishonest reference. Did Miss Larkin promise you advancement? No? Money? No. Did she tell you what to say? She told me I didn't have to. Speak unless I chose. Brierly gave a short, bitter laugh. A frightened kitchen girl is easily guided. Phoebe laid the 6 statements side by side, then explain why the same legal phrases appear across different hands. Harland pointed to the repeated wording. Private influence over His Grace's interpretation, expectation of future favor, improper advancement beyond station. These are not independent descriptions. Brierly looked toward Lady Maud. The movement was small. Everyone saw it. Sir Thomas turned to him. The supplier accounts also show that you profited from the continued maintenance of the hidden system. Harland placed the repair records beside the statements. Your commissions rose after Lord Julian's death. You controlled access to the walls, selected the tradesmen, and approved each charge. Brierly's composure weakened. I followed instructions. Lady Maud turned toward him. Do not be absurd. You wanted him isolated, Brierly said. You said the estate required a steady hand. You said uncertainty made him manageable. You used every repair to enrich yourself, and you used every signal to preserve control. Felicity drew a sharp breath. The alliance broke not from conscience, but from fear. Sir Thomas looked at Lady Maud. Did you authorize the secondary lines? She did not answer him. She looked at Cedric. I protected you. By making me appear unreliable? Cedric asked. By preventing another public collapse. There was no collapse. Your father nearly destroyed confidence in the estate because he refused to conceal disorder. So you concealed truth instead. Lady Maud's voice hardened. Someone had to preserve House Tresham. Cedric looked toward the open walls, the visible cord, and the servants gathered in the passage. You preserved your authority. Lady Maud said nothing. Felicity's hands tightened in her lap. Phoebe turned to her. You told the guests I interpreted His Grace's wishes before the dinner began. Felicity glanced at Lady Maud. I repeated what I was told. Why? Sir Thomas asked. Her composure faltered. Lady Maud said the guests must understand the danger of Miss Larkin's influence. Did you believe it? Phoebe asked. Felicity lowered her eyes. I wanted Lady Maud's approval. The admission was small, but it stripped away the elegance of her cruelty. Cedric faced the trustees. Grief made me vulnerable. Lady Maud and Brierly exploited it, but I will not hide behind that truth. I stopped asking questions. I accepted shame as habit. When Phoebe warned me not to destroy the mechanism, I ignored her judgment and repeated the same error in another form. I believed command was protection. I was wrong. Phoebe felt the words move through the room. He had not used confession to reclaim authority. He had used it to surrender false innocence. The senior trustee closed the preliminary inquiry papers. There is no basis for invoking the emergency powers under the family settlement. The second trustee nodded, nor any basis to seek intervention from Chancery. Sir Thomas addressed the constable. The sworn statements Documentary evidence and admissions provide sufficient grounds for Mr. Brierly to be brought before the local magistrates for formal examination concerning forged documents, uttering false statements, and conspiracy to defraud. Brierly looked toward the door. The constable stepped beside him. No force was needed. He was escorted out under supervision. Cedric turned to Lady Maud. "You no longer hold authority in this household. Any discretionary allowance paid from House Tresham funds is suspended pending review. Your separate property remains your own. You will leave for the dower house tomorrow. You would cast out your father's sister for a servant. I remove you because you used my name to silence servants." His answer left no place for appeal. Phoebe turned toward Pritchard. The corrections should be read now. Cedric understood at once. He ordered the service doors opened fully. Pritchard read each servant's name aloud. Nell, Hales, Vickery, Mrs. Pike. Every person threatened, coached, or falsely implicated was cleared before the same witnesses who had heard the accusations. Then Cedric looked at Phoebe, and Miss Phoebe Larkin, he said, was accused of manipulation, ambition, and false influence. She preserved evidence after I ordered it destroyed. She returned only under conditions protecting this household. She directed the inquiry that cleared my name and theirs. The accusations against her are withdrawn without qualification. No applause followed. The silence was better. It held recognition rather than spectacle. Cedric drew out the chair beside him. "Will you sit?" Phoebe looked toward the servants still standing in the passage. "Not until they hear that their references will be corrected in writing." "They will," Cedric said, "and restitution where wages or positions were lost. That too." Only then did Phoebe cross to the table. The cracked pewter plate rested on the sideboard. She placed one hand over its crescent fracture. "This is not evidence of what they did," she said. "It is evidence that a table was once shared and can be shared again." Later, when the witnesses had gone and the room stood quiet, Cedric did not reach for a bell. He walked to the door himself and opened it. "Will you dine with me?" Phoebe looked toward the closed shutters. "Open them first, Your Grace." Cedric crossed the room and unlatched each one. Cold night air entered without permission, honest and unhidden. Only then did Phoebe take the chair opposite him. 6 months later, Norcombe Hall no longer sounded like a house, waiting to contradict itself. The rebuilt bell system ran openly through mapped channels, and every alteration bore 2 signatures in the household ledger. No private room controlled a hidden line. No steward could order repairs without a second witness. The servants still worked by rank and routine, but no one was expected to obey an invisible command. Phoebe noticed that first when Mrs. Dacre's carriage stopped beneath the east portico on a mild May afternoon. The lawns had greened, the west wing windows stood open. Mr. Pritchard received them as guests, not as women being granted an exception. Miss Larkin, Mrs. Dacre. His beau was formal and warm. Behind him, Nell stood in the entrance hall, wearing the plain dress of a junior housemaid. She looked taller than she had in November, though perhaps courage had changed her posture. "You have advanced," Phoebe said. Nell smiled. "Mrs. Weatherby says I'm careful." The housekeeper appeared near the staircase and heard the remark. For one tense moment, Phoebe expected the old correction. Instead, Mrs. Weatherby said, "She is careful, and she has earned the place." The words were neither apology nor affection. They were accountability spoken without disguise. Phoebe accepted them. Not every failure required banishment. Some required a person to continue each day under rules that no longer protected their worst habits. Brierly had been convicted after formal examination and trial on charges involving forged documents, uttering false statements, and conspiracy to defraud the estate. His intimidation of servants had been entered into the evidence, along with the commissions he had taken through repair contracts. Lady Maud lived at the Dower House. Cedric had removed her household authority and suspended only the discretionary allowance paid from House Tresham funds. Her separate property remained legally her own. She had written to him twice. He answered once, stating that forgiveness, if it ever came, would not restore authority. Felicity's family withdrew her from close association with Norcombe after her admission became known. The punishment was not dramatic. It was social and exact. Invitations narrowed. Hostesses who had once enjoyed her polished cruelty became cautious about being seen to reward it. Society had not embraced Phoebe either. 2 families declined to receive her. A dinner invitation from Winchester was withdrawn. After the hostess learned Cedric intended to arrive with Phoebe, openly acknowledged as his guest. Cedric did not conceal the rejection from her. He also did not answer it with a public scene. He simply declined future invitations from the same household. "You are sacrificing influence," Phoebe told him when he called at Mrs. Dacre's parlor. "No," he said, "I am choosing where it is worth spending." His courtship had been proper, patient, and entirely inconvenient to gossip. He arrived with notice. Mrs. Dacre remained present. He wrote letters that contained questions instead of decisions. Phoebe answered when she chose. He did not ask her to return to Norcombe as a household advisor. He did not offer gratitude disguised as employment. When he prepared a marriage settlement, he showed it to her before speaking of marriage. The document protected property, settled upon her, guaranteed an independent income, and gave her authority over a private account that did not depend upon his approval. Phoebe objected to one clause, allowing the estate trustees to delay payments under undefined extraordinary circumstances. Cedric returned the document to Mr. Harland that same afternoon. "You expected me to object," she said, when he brought back the revision. "I hoped you would read closely enough to find something. That is not the same as hoping I would object." "No." He looked almost amused. "I am learning to separate those things." Now he waited near the drawing-room doors in a dark morning coat, sunlight across one shoulder. He looked steadier than he had 6 months before, though not untouched. Phoebe preferred that. Healing that erased consequence would have been another lie. Cedric bowed to Mrs. Dacre, then to her. "Miss Larkin, Your Grace." Mrs. Dacre glanced toward the terrace. "Mr. Pritchard informs me the Western roses have begun." Pritchard offered his arm. "Their reputation requires inspection." "Then we must not disappoint them." They departed with deliberate dignity, leaving the drawing-room doors open. Cedric looked toward Phoebe. "Will you walk with me?" Yes. He led her to the dining room. The long table remained. The dark paneling remained. The wall beside his former chair had been repaired plainly, without carving meant to hide where the bell-pull had once hung. Julian's cracked pewter plate rested at the center of the table, holding a round loaf of bread. It had not been polished into a relic. It had been returned to use. Phoebe touched the chair opposite Cedric's. "You did not replace the pull." "No." "How do you summon service?" "I do not summon it from this chair." He nodded toward the door. "There is a knock before each course. If I need something unusual, I ask when the door opens." "That sounds inconvenient." "It is." She smiled. Cedric watched the smile without trying to claim it. Then he placed one hand on the back of the chair across from his own. "I asked you here because I have one question left that evidence cannot answer." Phoebe felt her heartbeat quicken. She did not rescue him from the difficulty of saying it. "Will you marry me?" The words entered the room without witness or spectacle. Cedric continued before hope could become assumption. "I am not asking because you cooked one supper. I am not asking because you cleared my name. I am asking the woman who contradicted me when I was wrong, left when staying would have cost her self-respect, and returned only after the truth could stand without depending upon my favor." Phoebe looked at the bread on Julian's plate. "And when that woman contradicts you after marriage, she will." That was not the question. "No." Cedric's expression softened. "When she does, I will listen before I command. I will fail at times. I will not pretend otherwise. But I will not punish honesty because it unsettles me, and my place in this house will not be borrowed from my title or purchased by gratitude. The settlement remains yours, whether society approves of your birth or not. The household reforms remain whether you marry me or not." Phoebe searched his face. "Do you want the woman who served you, or the woman who told you that your protection had become control?" "They are the same woman," he said, "and I would dishonor both if I separated them." The answer did not erase every fear. It gave the fears somewhere honest to stand. "Why do you love me?" she asked. Cedric did not answer quickly. "Because you never asked me to need you. Because you made room at the table without demanding the seat. Because when I offered belief without respect, you left rather than teach me that love would accept less." Phoebe felt the old ache from the supper room loosen at last. Not vanish, change. She crossed the space between them. "Then yes." Cedric did not reach for her until she offered her hands. Only then did his fingers close around hers. His relief showed in the breath he released. "You are certain?" "No." Surprise crossed his face. Phoebe smiled. Certainty would be convenient. Choice is what we have. A quiet laugh escaped him. "Then I choose you." "And I choose you." Their engagement was announced that evening at a modest supper attended by Mrs. Dacre, Mr. Harland, Pritchard, Mrs. Pike, Nell, and several close estate associates. No ballroom applauded, no rival was present to be defeated. Cedric stated simply that Phoebe had entered Norcombe first, as a servant, returned as a witness, and now came by her own choice as his future wife. He did not present her worth as something his title had bestowed. When the next course was ready, a respectful knock sounded at the door. Every face turned instinctively toward the empty place where the bell pull had once hung. Cedric rose. He crossed the room and opened the door himself. Pritchard stood beyond it with the serving footman. No one hurried. No one feared that a hidden signal had spoken. Cedric stepped aside and allowed them to enter. Phoebe remained seated beside the bread plate because she no longer needed to serve in order to belong. Candlelight caught the crescent crack in the pewter. The floor had not been repaired. It had not been hidden. Beyond the open doorway, servants moved without fear, and the silence between each honest knock no longer belonged to grief. It belonged to choice.